Welcome to Bug Banter with the Xerces Society, where we explore the world of invertebrates and discover how to help these extraordinary animals. If you want to support our work, go to xerces.org/donate. Hi, I'm Matthew Shepard in Portland, Oregon.
And I'm Rachel Dunham in Missoula, Montana.
So flies are amazing insects that play critical roles in our environment, including pollination, waste disposal, pest control, and there's a link in the food web. Flies are greatly diverse in colors, shape, size, and where they live. Butterflies and bees probably generate more enthusiasm, but it's time to change that. To talk about flies with us, we are joined by Dr. Erica McAlister, who works at the Natural History Museum in London, where she is the principal curator for Diptera and Siphonaptera, i.e. flies and fleas. Erica takes a particular interest in three groups of flies: fungus gnats, assassin flies, and mosquitoes. The latter means that she inevitably is involved with many projects related to identification of mosquitoes and which ones are associated with spread of malaria and other diseases and viruses. But her experience is much broader, including teaching entomology in Dominica and studying the invertebrates, more specifically the flies of that island. Finally, Erica is also the award-winning author of 4 books, including The Secret Life of Flies and Inside Out of Flies. Welcome, Erica.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So before we get into questions, I want to talk about names, and that's because, you and I are British. Rachel is American. I've been in the US for 25 years or more, and so this is a topic that I've bumped into a number of times, and already in the introduction we mentioned assassin flies, and so some American listeners might be going, well, what's an assassin fly? And that's kind of what sparked me wanting to insert this, because assassin flies I look up in the index of the US Field Guide and I don't find them, only assassin bugs, but that doesn't mean they don't exist here.
I thought assassins was an American name. We call them robber flies.
Oh, because we call them robber flies here too.
Yeah, no, so there's you have some of the world's experts on assassin flies, Torsten Dicko in Smithsonian, and he's got the assassin fly website and he loves, and we call them robber flies. So we have the robber fly recording ski, which is quite cool.
Nice.
I don't know which one I prefer because both of them are quite good at conferring.
Yeah, it describes what they do.
Yeah, I mean, they rob life, they steal life, they do all sorts of amazing things. They're highly venomous flies. Oh, yeah, but, so do a lot of things. But that's just nature, it's not Disney. So, yes, we have those that are different names. Then we have the hoverflies, and you call them, or they're known as flower flies.
Or syrphids, yeah.
Yeah, syrphids I prefer because that's on their Latin name, Syrphidae. And I think of them surfing across the air. So as you see them hovering in your garden, I just think of them surfing. And I think that's a nice, when I learned all my scientific names, I would sit there in my head thinking of all these different ways to remember them. And I still can't now say syrphids without kind of just striking a little pose. But this is why we should use scientific names, not common names, because then it's meant to be a universal language we could all understand. Because, I mean, just for example, in the UK, woodlice, there's loads and loads and loads of common names for woodlice, depending on where you are in the UK. And they're all little colloquial, little like folk names for them.
Yeah, I know.
Which is like, it gets very confusing just in the UK. Can you imagine globally?
Yeah, totally. No, I have a copy of the Bugs Britannica book here by Richard Mabey and Peter Maron, I think.
Yes,
yeah, and that lists loads and loads of names for the woodlice. So yeah, it's awesome. Yeah.
All right, well, we're gonna jump into our questions, and we're gonna start with the basics. We haven't talked about flies really on our podcast yet, and I'm really excited to cover this topic. Very excited to have you here. We refer to flies as Diptera. What does that name mean?
So Diptera, Diptera, di is 2, terra as the Ptera is the wing. So it's the 2 wings. And this is in reference to a typical, I won't say all, a typical adult fly. So it's meant to be one of the diagnostic features of that order. The other being a suctorial mouthpart. So you cannot be bitten by a fly. You can be like pierced and maimed and shredded and all sorts of fun things like that, but not actually bitten because they don't have they don't have a jaw as such. And then they have one of the most phenomenally exciting things is this pair of halteres. Now, they are not unique with having halteres. We see it obviously in the twisted wing parasites, the Strepsiptera, and we see it in some bugs as well. So some coccids and things like that, they have a pair of halteres. And these, though, are the most amazing proprioceptors. They're the balancing organs. They're the gyroscopic, they enable them to have some of the most phenomenal flight patterns on the planet. And these little flies, they're little jump jets, they're hovers, they do all sorts of things. They can zoom in, upside down. I mean, just landing upside down on the ceiling, oh, I've got that silly song in my head now, but is just a phenomenal feat. And we don't give them enough credit. I mean, I can barely coordinate as I've got a sprained ankle, right? Basically walking along a flat ground. And they're operating in this three-dimensional space. And you're like, wow. So they are so good at what they're doing. But in saying those three things that make it a fly, there's lots of flies that don't have mouth parts. There's flies that don't have wings. And there's some flies that don't have halters. So they're very good at taking that basic blueprint and laughing at it and going, do you know what, evolution? Let's see what I can do next. So they're highly adaptable, both in morphology and behavior and many other things.
I love that. So flies are obviously a very diverse group of insects.
You're sounding English now. You've got two other English.
I didn't even mean to do that.
You've got West Country on us, lass.
And they're actually one of the most diverse orders. So how many species are there?
So they're not the most described yet. We are, I think, it's about the recent, I got told recently, I think we're up to 185,000. So we are very lucky to have an amazing community of dipterists around the world. And we have the International Diptera Society now, and we have all sorts of things. And everyone is working to try and sort out the list of names and clean it up. So it's not the biggest. Coleoptera or beetles has about 400,000. But I describe myself as a fly. I've got to stop one day doing that. Us and Hymenoptera are in what has been termed the dark taxa, which I love it because it has leanings towards fantasy realms. And it's basically because there's a lot of stuff out there and a lot of small stuff that is very cryptic. We don't know what species there are, etc. So estimates with flies at real numbers, we are a lot higher than what we thought. There was a shocking paper that came out of Canada that estimated in the millions with one family, Cecidomyidae, which is the tiny gall midges. There's the ones that we all go, oh God, it's Cecids. They all look alike. And there's one or two ardent fans go, no, they don't trust me. And the rest of us are like, I think they do. But they estimated 1.8 million species within that one family of fly. And yes, your face is exactly. We were like, oh dear, nope. So, but it's, there's a lot more out there. They're very diverse.
So you talk about small. I think we've probably all seen like the classic black fly that's flying around our food, or maybe us if we don't smell very good. But when you talk about tiny, like how small is the tiniest fly and what is that comparable to?
Oh, the tiniest fly is a phorid. Horrid phorid, I affectionately call him. Sorry, Brian Brown in Museum of Los Angeles, who is like the prince of the very small, very small, like less than a full stop. These flies, I call them horrid phorid because they're really easy to get to family, really distinct venation on their wings when they have them. But when you get species level, there is issues when it comes to taxonomy. But Brian Brown, you need to look up some of them. He's described the smallest flies in the world. And one of them he's named after Arnold Schwarzenegger, because it has got really muscly legs, which is quite cute. I'm sure Arnie loves that.
Oh, that's great. So can you find flies all over the world? Are there areas where there are fewer flies, more flies?
I like flies because they basically get their tarsa into every little habitat you can come across. They are really, really good at doing that. So we talk about the largest purely terrestrial animal in the Arctic is a fly, a whopping 3 millimeters. Whoa. They are, oh, sorry, Antarctic. In the Arctic as well, they're everywhere. In fact, of the 4,000 fly species in the Arctic, I think 2,000 are flies. They love a nice bit of freezing. They're in the deserts, they're in caves, they're in the deepest lakes of the world. They love saline environments. So you got the mono lakes of California, they're in there. I was very lucky to go and collect some flies from the tar pits, the La Brea tar pits, which was amazing. Flies living in petroleum. I mean, come on. They're just doing it. And there's flies in space because we've sent them up there and they've been living in little colonies in space. So yeah, come on. And there's marine flies. There's some beautiful chironomids. They're a family of flies. They're the non-biting midges. And I describe these as the explorers because they are basically the ones who've gone, let's try it out. So they're in the Antarctic, the Arctic, the mountains, the bottom of lakes, in the sea. And some of them live in the desert, and there's one species known as the sleeping chironomid, where it can, if the times are bad, it just goes to sleep 13 years. 13 years of sleeping. I mean, why do we bother as humans? Amazing things.
Wow, that's incredible. So for folks that are listening that may be sort of new to IDing different insects, bees and flies can sometimes look somewhat similar. What's kind of the easy way to tell them apart? And is there an easy way to tell them apart?
They fly differently. So bees and bumbles, the humble bumbles, etc., they kind of loop more. Flies have got a little bit more purpose. They're like, move across bees. We've got things to do. We've got attitude. We're going to do it. Obviously at rest, it's the 2 pairs of wings rather than the 4 pairs of wings, although I admit that can be quite difficult. Generally, the antennae are different. Hymenoptera generally have bowed antennae. So I'm going to tell you there's loads of flies that have that as well. Bees, I don't often see, so solitary bees are generally, if they're not feeding, they're not there. Well, flies you'll often see resting in many places. And they are definitely checking you out. I love the way everyone thinks that all flies are plotting because they're always doing that, and they're like, what is going on? This is not plotting, although I like to believe some are. Is that they have to keep themselves ultra clean. They are exceptionally clean animals. They have a huge sensory apparatus on their head, where most of the insects do, and they have to always keep this clean. So that's why they look like they're planning the overthrow of a government.
I like that. We're just saying about them being ultra clean, because so often we associate flies with dirt.
Yeah.
Which just seems like a pretty bad rep that they've got.
So I'm not going to lie. I mean, there's a lot of flies that do like that, but disproportionately they don't. So a lot of, and no offense, a lot of the time you're seeing the flies is because they're in a human-induced environment, and we are filthy. Rachel, you were saying earlier, you do smell, and I don't mean this personally, but I mean, the pair of you absolutely stink. They have exceptionally, I love telling people this. No, we don't. Oh, you really do, trust me. Even dead, they can smell a corpse on a really good day up to 9 kilometers away. Can you imagine what a living, breathing human smells like then? And we create these environments. We leave food out. We are surrounded by our own waste and decomposing material and all sorts of things. So of course they're going to come. And because a lot of their larvae live in these environments, they have to make sure that they don't get any bacterial infections. And one of the, I told you I was going to go off piste. Here we go again. So maggots, they're looking at the antibacterial properties of maggots because they can live in feces or dead flesh and things like that. And it kind of looks like they're covered with loads of like microvilli. And this causes or prevents the bacteria from managing to get to them. So we're thinking of developing like pills and medicine coated with a similar property, a similar structure, so we can send them into environments so they don't get destroyed by bacteria. So I love the fact that we've looked at these animals living in these weird, filthy environments and thought, how can we understand that and utilize it for our own good?
Yeah. No, I knew that maggots had been used for keeping wounds clean, but
I know.
not thought further as to, well, why can they survive in those places?
And I love this because it's now getting other disciplines looking at our environment. It's not just entomologists going, that's amazing. It's actually having like physicists and medics and biochemists going, now why is that amazing?
But all of that leads us into, I mean, natural history of flies. 185,000 species, maybe 1.8 million. I mean, there must be so many different kind of life histories behind that for, egg laying and feeding and finding shelter and habitat. I mean, is there such a thing as a kind of a typical life history for flies?
So flies, I'll give you typical, but flies, as I've already said, they don't really stick to that blue plan. So there's the egg, the larval stage, in which there may be a number of instars, depending on what species it is. And then like many or most of the animals on the planet, I should say, they go for a complete metamorphosis. So then they go through this pupal stage, and then there's the adult. Now, this is where it gets fun, because all of that depends on what you are. And some of them don't even do that, which is like, there's a whole group, a whole infraorder of flies that give birth to live young. So they properly get pregnant. They have lactating glands on the inside. So she suckles her larvae internally. I mean, the idea like of these little flies being properly pregnant little mothers. And she gives birth. Like this is examples as the tsetse. And you've got the bat flies and the bird flies. And sometimes they can give birth to something that has a mass greater than them, which as a female sounds horrific, I'll tell you. Which is why she will only give birth to maybe up to 3 in her lifetime, because you wouldn't want to go through that. Whereas you've got others which have gone for the opposite. So they're terrible mothers. Some of them will have weaponized ovipositors. So she basically has a submachine gun that she fires off thousands of eggs around the garden and just abandons them. So she's she's gone from really caring to, good luck. And then with some of these, like the aquaserids, the spider killing flies, or the hunchback flies, I think you can tell what they look like and where they live with that name. And then the bee flies, these are parasitoids. So the mother she holds out thousands of eggs. And the larvae then go through 2 different types of form, which is great. They change from this planarium, which is this it's the toddler stage of a human life cycle. It's very active. It's trying to get as fast as possible. You've no idea where it's going because it has to get to its host. And often this host is underground. It will kind of try and find it as quickly as possible. And then it reverts to a second form, which is like the teenager. It becomes like this big slob and just sits with its host, consuming it, and just lying there. And honestly, its form is just beautifully globular and things like that. It's like, I'm just going to eat and eat. And then, it will, once it's finished feeding, may take a while, it then migrates back out of this nest and pupates, and these beautiful fluffy or hunchback adults appear. So you get a lot of variety. Some of them are amazing. So sarcophagids, these are the flesh flies. These live in their larvae feed on carrion, and any animal that has an ephemeral food source, they have to be ready to act immediately. So you think about things that live in dead bodies or anything like that, decomposing material, they're out there, they've got to do it. So she can change depending on what the food environment is, from laying eggs to laying larvae. And they've dissected mature females, and they've got larvae all the way up to their ovaries. Can you imagine that writhing mass inside you? I just love flies. So you've got all these, and then you've got, where do I even start? Metamorphosis, the pupal stage is a phenomenal thing. And in a lot of flies, this is what we consider inactive. But then you've got things like mosquitoes that the pupa is active, these beautiful tumblers as they're knocking up and down the water column. It's It's something Barbara described it as a beautiful thing, watching these things going up and down, and it truly is. But you've also got ones within the pupa. They have a puparium, so the higher flies, they have this extra case, and they have basically an airbag on their head that once they're ready to get out of the puparium, they burst their head. So it's literally, they blow the doors off, if any Michael Caine fans out there. You blow off the bloody doors, as it says in the film. And then you can watch them afterwards as they've like hatched from this puparium, and their heads are like woo, woo, woo. And as they're engulfing more air, this collapses, their wings expand, their body takes form from this dull grey to this beautiful metallic sheen, maybe green or blue as in the blue bottles. And it's just a phenomenal thing seeing that. And most of the flies, the larval stage is in completely different habitat to the adult stage. So there's no competition then. It's not like baby bees that just stay at home and get looked after by the aunties. You know, these ones are out there, they're doing stuff, they're contributing to the world society, I'm telling you. And they, you know, so there's no competition between these two, which has enabled them to be so phenomenally successful.
Wow.
Sorry, I get a bit excited.
Yeah, no, bug banter is totally the place to do that, you know.
Well, what I love about flies as well is that you can see all of this in your garden or in a plant pot. You know, we don't have to travel to see such phenomenally amazing things. The metamorphosis, the idea of reorganizing most of your body tissue. I mean, come on, humans are so dull. You've got this, like, I'm going to basically spend most of my life cycle eating, which I think we should all take heed to and think that's a really good thing. Then we change our body form, and then we just, the next bit is just a tiny bit of reproduction, and that's it. How fantastic. No taxes.
I was going to ask whether there was any kind of distinctive or unusual life histories you could tell us about that. I mean, you've already done that, but if there's any others, just because this is so fascinating to
I'll tell my favorite
yeah.
bat fly, and this is it's a bat fly that, and there's a lot of flies that when they copulate, the female will rip her wings off. Okay, so those forays I talked about earlier, so some of them are coffin flies, so I think you figure out their habitat. So they will copulate either mid-air, and then the males just drop them. Ooh, little like mother torpedoes going down, and they were buried down to the corpse in which they let their eggs. But there's some other bat flies that when she gets pregnant and she's on a bat, she will, you know, stick her head in the bat because she's feeding off them. But she also rips off her wings and then her legs, and then evaginates her abdomen over her body entirely. And it's like, well, hold on a minute, why? And the really lovely thing is, if you look at the anal spiracles, or if you look at the spiracles of flies, they kind of do look like little faces. So it's like this giant, like, button face on the side of the bat. You're like, that's really a fly. So it looks like a flare, a pear with a little stamp on its bottom. It's just weird. But it's like, how do these evolve? You know, how do botflies evolve? How did it evolve that the reindeer botfly, the mother squirts her maggots into the nostrils of this reindeer? I mean, or talking of botflies, as we do, the Dermatobia hominis, the human botfly, which is, it's, of course, we've named it after us, but we came along lately. And so this was a botfly of large mammals in Central and South America. And then we came along and we were everywhere. So they were like, why not? Now, a botfly, I don't know if you've ever seen them. They're quite big and chunky. They're quite amazing, but they're also, we can hear them. So they're quite cumbersome things. So the botflies, the Dermatobia, what it does is it catches another fly that will take the risky business of getting its baby to a host. So, for example, for us, it catches mosquitoes and horseflies, but it's also on phanids and mussids and things like that, which are attracted to the other large ruminants. So we have them in the collection in the museum, little mosquitoes with like eggs of the botfly on it. She's stuck to the side. And then when the mosquito comes to us, the change in body temperature causes them to hatch and then fall into us. And how cool is that? Love evolution.
It's just amazing that they can bring another species into their own life cycle.
Manipulative. Told you, can't trust a fly.
I could listen to you talk about flies for ages. It's so interesting. I am muted while you're talking, but I've been laughing this whole time and just truly amazed about flies. They're really these unsung chameleons of the insect and animal kingdom. I mean, it's really incredible. I'm just incredibly impressed. And I love how you talk about them. It's really great. I wish we could sit here all day and just have you tell us stories about flies.
I'm really lucky where I work. So I meet daily visitors from all around the world who tell me about their particular type of fly they love. And you can't help but be amazed, A, by the flies, and B, by the people researching them as well. Because these are their passions. And I find it still disheartening that we're still looking at flies in one way. When it's not, I mean, can you imagine if we based all mammals on us? And how dull we would find that, all birds based on a robin or, something like that. And we do this, we lump it, and we consider ourselves, as lovers of nature. And I meet so many people who are like, well, love nature. Oh, I don't like flies. You're like, oh, but you've just written off a huge chunk of nature, a massive chunk of nature. And it's like, and they get up to, they're so diverse. And they're morphologically diverse. There's a load of stalk-eyed flies. These they headbutt each other. I mean, come on. And they form little territories and they leck. And often they will do all sorts of things. They've got, some of them have grown antlers outside of their cheeks. There's some Dolicopodids that have little flags on their abdomen. Hello. Some of them have these reversible glands that the male will stick his head in. It's very rude, I have to say. Drosophila, they have these sex combs on their front legs. They stroke the lady. There's a group of Sepsidae, which are the scavenger flies or lesser dung flies. A whole lab in Singapore was dedicated to studying their flirty behavior. I think that's how I should describe it here. And these flies kiss each other. It's just kind of, come on, there's a lot going on with them.
Oh, definitely. So aside from just being super cool and very interesting, why should we care about flies?
So I hate that question because we should just like animals anyway. But if we were to bring them down to ecological functions, well, basically we wouldn't really survive without them. So everybody knows the bees as the pollinators, which isn't quite the case in many an environment. So a lot of the social bees, and we're going to let's get rid of honeybees straight off, okay? They're a farmyard animal. Yeah, I'm happy. We're ditching them. Yeah, they're not part of this ecological conversation. And anyway, honeybees have got a short tongue, and so they're not adapted to a lot of the plants. But that's another point. I'm going to stop going on about honeybees. Apparently, I'm too taxist when it comes to the bees, and I must refrain from being. But flies actually were pollinators of gymnosperms. So even before the angiosperm radiation happened and all the flowering plants, the flies were there pollinating. They're really important pollinators. And unlike many of the bees, because they don't live in the same social structure, they don't go home at night or go home to feed their larvae, their offspring. So they are doing more visiting events. They are messy feeders. Bees have now nice little pollen baskets and everything's also cute and whatever. Flies all over their faces, right? Pollen is just everywhere. You need to check out mosquitoes flying around with massive lumps of pollen on them. It's just quite incredible to see. And in doing so, they're really good at transferring. So they may not be able to take as much pollen in one event, but because their activity, they're transferring loads of it. Only really just beginning to look at these pollinating things. In the Arctic, they've been doing lots of pollinator studies, and yep, it's the flies doing most of the pollination. And they are able to survive in very harsh environments, all sorts of things going on there. And the pollinators in the Arctic, the big ones, are the houseflies. So, we think about, if we were to think about flies being important pollinators, we'd think about the hoverflies, and they are exceptionally good pollinators, and I'll get onto those in a minute. But mosquitoes are really good pollinators. And the ceratobegonids, those biting midges, seem to have taken a very, very good liking to my partner, who's very upset right now with my flies. Although none of them attack me, it's like they know I'm here. They're like, we're going to leave her alone. Those biting midges, they are the pollinators of chocolate. So you've got chocolate, pollinators of coffee, carrots, mangoes, all sorts of things. Some of the primary pollinators are flies because they're so adaptable in their morphology. So cocoa, for example, I describe as the panda of the plant. It's generally useless fertilizing, okay, and like producing fruits as well, which is what most people are interested in. It's really basic and really small, so it needs these tiny little flies to be able to maneuver itself around with inside these flowers. You've got yeah, so the sort of hoverflies, these are great. And what we've been looking at recently, there's some amazing work on migratory hoverflies. So some work that have come out of the UK, University of Plymouth and places like that, looking at these flies that have come over from Iraq, Iran, sub-Saharan Africa to come to the UK. So 3 generations of hoverflies. And a lot of these are polyphagous, you know, they're pollinating all sorts of different things, spreading on pollen. They're quite high, so they're able to see relic populations. So they're enabling gene flow to occur across these environments. 3 generations getting here, so the little things are dying everywhere, which sounds terrible to them, but it's little nitrogen packages everywhere. So they're adding a lot to the soils. And then when they get to the UK, and this is what I love about these immigrants, they get to the UK and they mix with the local population. And the fecundity rate, if you mix these 2 populations, goes up enormously. And they produce little biological warfare packets. Their larvae are aphidophagous, so they eat aphids. So they're naturally controlling all the pests of our crops and our gardens, etc. So everything about these pollinators is superb. And I love the fact, though, there's some orchids that have caught on to this. And I don't trust orchids as far as I can throw them. They're the sneakiest plants now. And they release, so a lot of them will release a sexual pheromone that says to the male hoverflies, hey, ladies here. But there's some others that release a distressed aphid pheromone. So these mothers will come down and lay their eggs there because they're like, oh, it's a good habitat for our little larvae. We'll pollinate the orchid and then being manipulated. It's just lots of manipulation going on. So exceptionally important pollinators. Just think about the species richness and think about the abundance. We talked about house flies, but there's some calliphorids, the blue bottles, blowflies. We're looking at them in greenhouses as pollinators for bell peppers. So you name it, they're doing all sorts of things.
That's amazing. Yeah, they're so important. And yeah, I think that question is slightly obnoxious because, you know, we should all just care about all animals because we should.
But the thing about them is that even if the adults are pollinators, the larvae are generally doing a different thing. They're decomposers, they're predators, they're parasitoids. So one of the hoverflies, you know, well, half of the family of hoverflies in the subfamily Aristolani, for example, their larvae are all basically hipsters. They're all recyclers, you know, so they're decomposing, they're recycling our organic matter. And these are the ones that kind of, a lot of them will look like, they're called rat-tailed maggots, which I call bog snorkelers, because they've got this. I'm so the worst person for names. I'm really sorry. Next time, ask an adult person on. And these, they've got this anal spiracle, which is a great name. So there's this tubercle, this very telescopic spiracle, for which they will breathe from their bums, because breathe from your bums, eat with your mouth, much more sensible. And they're able to do this massive amount of recycling and then turn into these amazing pollinators. Like other insects aren't like this. They don't have this bifold life cycle where they can be wonderful at both parts.
No, that's great. No, and I really don't think we need to have an adult on. This is awesome.
I love the names. They're my favorite.
I just like the idea of these little animals bog snorkeling everywhere, just eating and bog snorkeling.
Yeah.
And you can see it if you go to the edge of the ponds or in your compost. Just rip apart your compost, you can see these creatures in there, and it's like, wow, this is really quite cool. And a lot of them are very translucent, so you can actually see their gut contents, and you're like, wow, that is recycling in my face.
Yeah, when you're talking about the bog snorkeling and also the similarity between some flies and bees, I was trying to remember, was it Aristotle who thought that bees came from dead
Dead
cows,
creatures,
and that was
yes.
because they'd
Yep.
seen the flower flies, the hover flies come, that had been bog snorkeling in carcasses, and they'd
Yeah.
seen the adults coming out.
Yeah, it's exactly that, because some of them are known for myiasis, which is any infestation caused by a fly, and they were in this carrion. I know. I still find it amazing that 2,000 years on, we're still quoting the same things,
Yeah.
and that science has not, like, maybe we're just bad publicists, but it's like we really, really should be moving on from just these common misconceptions. I'm not having a go at you, but it's just,
but
yeah.
no, but that was kind of my next question, really, was, I mean, what kind of misunderstandings do you think that people have about flies?
They're all dirty. And that's the number one thing. They're all disease carriers, which is interesting as we carry more diseases. But anyway, yes, a lot of them are vectors. So a vector is they transmit all sorts of things, from plasmodium, so malaria, to filariasis, little worms, as well as bacteria and viruses. So right now I've just been to a mosquito control conference. That's why I'm in Puerto Rico. Thank you, beautiful island of Puerto Rico. And we're talking about all these things. Now, there's 3,600 described species of mosquito, of which 50 of them are good vectors, of which maybe 20 are top vectors. And these mosquitoes, because of their feeding habits, they're the ones who've been manipulated as well. So the malaria manipulates the mosquito. So one of my big misconceptions is that mosquitoes are the biggest killers on the planet. Well, no mosquito has ever killed a human. For mosquitoes to kill you, you would need 144,000 or something like that. I worked out on a piece of paper once, exsanguinating you at one time, right? And we just don't have that much skin for them to all land and feed. And, if that was to happen, I think there's a lot of other things going badly wrong at the time. And so we need to I feel that we need to move away from saying, look, let's try and stop, maybe work on these 20 species. But what we do know is that malaria jumps quickly from species to species if it goes wrong. So let's think about how we can maybe think about stopping that part of the transmission, rather than just trying to eradicate mosquitoes, because eradicating mosquitoes feels very much like putting a plaster on it, or as you Americans call it, a band-aid on the situation. And we really need to think holistically of why these populations are becoming so prevalent, and why is there a way we could do it without just trying to throw money at it and do it in this kind of harmful way that we've generally done in the past with lots and lots of chemicals. Yeah. So I'd like us to think about that. And even if I was to talk about vectors as a whole, within 185,000, we are still not talking a lot. There's 6,500 species of mammals, of which one is a very, very destructive one. And I would wonder, proportionally, are there more destructive mammals on the planet than there are flies? I don't know. But I think that's the way of looking at it. So that's a misconception, that they're all bad. A misconception they're all filthy. A misconception they're all ugly. I'm sorry. If you've ever seen a bee fly, that's just a lie, because they look like little fluffy flying narwhals. They're just 100% adorable and whatever. And even like little cicadids, these are the owl midges, or another word for them is drain flies, which is terrible. but half the family, the cicodas, and half of them are cicodines, and the other half, which I understand, they're the vector carriers, so we can ignore those for this moment. But the cicodines, they look like little caped crusaders, you know, and they've got these kind of really fluffy little wings and fluffy little bodies, and they just walk around in little compost going, huh, what am I doing? And it's like they're permanently forgetting what they're doing because they've got that slightly shocked walk the whole time. But if you look at them under a microscope, in fact, if you look at most flies under a microscope, it's like, wow. The ruvids, the stiletto flies, they're like the hipsters. You know, they've all got beards. Your robber flies, a lot of them have got moustaches. I mean, even the ladies. You've got to appreciate that as a woman of a certain age. There's so much beauty in them that I think we need to just give them a chance.
Yeah, my follow-up question would be, if you want one thing you want people to remember about flies, what would it be? And I don't know if, is it the beauty of them, or is it?
I'd go diversity. I mean, diversity in absolutely everything. In life cycle, in food, in habitat, in life history, in form, in absolutely anything. Diversity, it's just... Because I think one of the reasons I got into them is because I loved insects. I love the fact they dominate the world and they do all these things. And I was an ecologist. I love the interactions or whatever. And every time you'd go anywhere, there'd be like a fly going, oh. You'd be like, oh, really? You're here as well? Yeah. And so you want questions being answered. You'd look to the flies.
Yeah. And amongst all of that diversity, do you have a particular favorite?
Do you have children?
Yeah.
Do you have more than one?
Yeah.
And would you have to pick?
Well, I've got a favorite son and a favorite daughter.
Okay, you got one over each. I have flies of the week. I'm actually wearing this lovely fly. This is a robber fly. And I definitely have a soft spot for the larger Brachycera. But no, I can't. Because immediately I start thinking of one, I go on to another one.
Mm-hmm.
And I quite like a brolid, which are the bee riders. Just because they've got combs for feet, because they've got to hold on to the bee's back. And also because they just look like little teddy bears when they're walking along. And the fact that they're kleptoparasites, they're not true parasites, and they just feed on the food around the bee's mouth. It's just like they're like little personalized beard cleaners. And I no, can't pick, not gonna pick.
Speaking of favorites, that was my favorite answer of that question, that you just can't answer it. And Matthew sounds like my dad, because I have a brother and he's always like, you're my favorite daughter. I'm like, Dad, I'm your only daughter. He's like, but still, you're my favorite daughter.
See, I'm one of three, and I definitely know I am their favorite. I'm just going to say that now, because they can't hear this, but I know it's true.
Oh gosh, that is funny. So we have a couple questions that we ask all of our guests, and you talked a little bit about sort of what caught your eye about flies when you were already studying insects, but what inspired you to study insects in the first place, and then leading on to this very interesting group?
I think it's because they are there. They are, you know, if you want to know nature, I mean, I grew up quite feral. Well, my parents raised me and dragged me up feral, but they also gave me a microscope quite early on. So those two combinations, plus we didn't watch TV. So it was books, nature, and a microscope. And that seemed to be a heady combination of an awkward social childhood, but a fun adulthood with a vivid imagination. And nature has more imagination than me. And so looking at all these insects, I'm like, gosh, what's going on here? So there's the nosy Erica that loves it. And then it just honed it down. I studied ants in Australia, and I vowed never to study ants again. Oh my God. It was just like, there's a lot of ants, a lot of the same ants. I was identifying them. I played around with beetles for a bit, and that was great fun, but they're all right. And then the flies just kind of like nestled their way in and said, have you thought about us? It's like a group help for entomologists. And I was like, I hadn't really, although I have been paying attention to you, and then suddenly I couldn't turn back. That kind of hooked me.
And then our very last question. It's if you could see any bug in the wild, and bug, broad, any kind of insect, invertebrate, what would it be?
Okay, in New Zealand, there's this fly which lives with bats. And this fly is a social fly. It lives in a community. And the older male flies will look after the larvae, and the larvae and the adults clean each other. And the male flies will guard the nest by zzz. It's like that works. But I would love to see something like that. And in fact, if I'm still in New Zealand, because there's a lot of crazy flies, I want to go and see the bioluminescent caves and seeing all the predatory caryoplattids that just eat their sisters and brothers, which I just think is hilarious, talking about our previous conversation. So yeah, I would like to see 2 examples of the flies being naturally weird.
Well, Erica, my cheeks hurt from smiling so much. This has just been so wonderful. I have learned so much and I'm so inspired. I feel like flies might be my new insect, my new favorite.
See? They are wonderful.
They really are. I just feel like you have such an amazing way to open this world that's so beautiful that I think so many of us miss out on. So it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for inspiring us and sharing so much knowledge. We appreciate it.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been really brilliant.
Bug Banter is brought to you by the Xerces Society, a donor-based nonprofit that is working to protect insects and other invertebrates, the life that sustains us. If you are already a donor, thank you so much. If you want to support our work, go to xerces.org/donate. For information about this podcast and for show notes, go to xerces.org/bugbanter.